evening, comrades and friends in New York City. We bring you a victorious greetings from the Boston branch of Workers' World Party and from the National Labor Faction. I'm calling from the membership meeting of the Boston school bus drivers, and I'd like to mention that my thoughts may be a bit disjointed because just in the last 48 hours, we have received notice from the ruling class of Boston that they intend to cut $100 million from the Boston public schools, most of which is aimed at our local, including kicking 11,000 children off of school buses and increasing the walk zones to 2 miles. So it's never a dull moment for the class struggle in this dead-end period of capitalist rot and decay. Eddie Childs, who was the leader of the Harvard dining service workers strike for 22 days, from his base of 42 years as a cook at Harvard University, very much wanted to give remarks to this meeting tonight, but unfortunately he had to go to work. He did ask me to relate a story of Monday evening and Tuesday morning when more than 500 students walked out of class at Harvard University, threatening their student status, and marched to where negotiations were happening with Local 26 and their leadership and Harvard University. And they occupied the building until late into the night, bringing a victorious settlement at 1:30 in the morning. Wow. At which time the Unite HERE leadership ordered that the pickets in the morning be called off. Eddie, of course, slept in a little bit the next morning, and he lives near the campus, and when he got up and was walking toward the campus, he heard sounds of drums and whistles and banging and chanting in the streets, literally defying the leadership of the union's demand not to have pickets that day. He ran into hundreds of his co-workers, Latino, Black, Caribbean, Asian, mostly women, Native people, many people from the lesbian, gay, bi, trans, queer communities who did not want to give up the power that they'd had on the streets. It was, in fact, not an exaggeration to call it a total victory after 22 days of one of the hardest fought strikes the city of Boston has ever seen. In fact, the last strike at Harvard University lasted 1 day in 1983. It was, Eddie wants to explain, a very political strike. Harvard University, of course, was founded and built on the backs of African slaves, by which it was funded. It cleared its land through the genocide of indigenous peoples. And from the Kennedy School of Government, when the generals and diplomats and CIA operatives who teach there decide it's time for war, the Pentagon has a war. When the economics department decides it's time to bail out the banks and the insurance companies, that's exactly what the government does. When the medical school long ago preached eugenics, that's what happens in the hospitals. When politics department wants neoliberal austerity, that's what happened. And in 1912, when the president of the university, his name was Lowell, there's a city in Massachusetts named after him, wanted to do something about the Great Bread and Roses strike in Lawrence, he armed the students from Harvard University, and they went to Lawrence, Massachusetts as armed goons and strikebreakers. This was so much more than a union victory. It was a political victory. Before I get into the details of the settlement, Ed wants to emphasize that this was as well a huge victory for Workers' World Party. As I said, Ed was a founder of the union 42 years ago, with decades of roots in the struggle there on the campus, occupying buildings for a living wage, solidarity with the African National Congress, bringing delegations to every anti-war demonstration, cooking every year at the National Day of Mourning in Plymouth, Massachusetts, bringing our comrade Leslie Feinberg many times to do teach-ins and lead people to the Pride marches in Boston. The tactics were of the party, many of which, Ed explained, were inspired by the Occupy Wall Street movement, and especially the Black Lives Matter movement. There were no traditional pickets at this strike. There are 40 different houses that have cafeterias all over the campus and all over Cambridge and even into Boston, where the medical school is. Instead, for 22 days, hundreds of workers from 6 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock at night marched through the streets with bullhorns, with hundreds of 5-gallon drums turned upside down, banging on them with kitchen spoons, with trumpets and trombones, and the chants of no justice, no peace, and if we don't get it, we'll shut it down. It brought Harvard and the ruling class that runs it to a crazy attitude that, in fact, nothing could operate on the campus while the strike was going on. Ed, as a matter of fact, taking the example of some of our founding comrades who worked in the steel mills and organized the unions and industrial organizations, decided that his place every day was in the street, even though he was the lead organizer and the head of the negotiating committee, besides some of the upper labor staffers. Every single day, negotiations happened while Ed and our comrades in Boston led marches and occupations and sit-ins and demonstrations and teach-ins throughout the campus all day long to understand that nothing would happen at the negotiating table that wasn't reflected in the street. As well, every worker and hundreds of students daily read statements from the Monica Moorhead and Lamont Lilly campaign, read printouts of Workers' World articles and papers in their entirety, and had hundreds of conversations with our comrades. In fact, it has to be noted, and the workers noted it, that there were no other presidential candidates, either from the bourgeois parties or any of the other left parties, at the picket lines, except for the Monica Moorhead Lamont Lilly campaign. And it was talked about sometimes in very heated debates. But it is known by hundreds of workers who were on strike that the candidates of Workers' World Party, in fact, had their backs. The fact is, and I don't think it goes farther enough to say, that if it were not for a communist there, with Workers' World's long-term commitment, there would be no union, there would have not been a strike, and there would not be a victory. The Workers' World Party, in alliance with the workers, brought Harvard to its knees by creating a huge crisis for the ruling class that had them turn upon themselves when even the Boston Globe had to editorialize in favor of the strike in the last days, and the New York Times had to print an op-ed written by one of the leading striker women. The details of the contract were astounding. The workers won far more than they even asked for in their demands. Harvard's very political proposal of austerity that was literally written by Goldman Sachs, the AIG Insurance Corporation, and the Citicorp Bank included huge increases to the health insurance in the premiums, big co-pays that were never there before, deductibles that would have taken thousands of dollars out of the workers' pockets, major concessions that even the professors and other employees on the campus had already taken. The strike, however, resulted in no change to health insurance for the first 2 years, a total victory in and of itself. But in the third and fourth and fifth years, the premiums will actually go down, there will be no co-pays, and there will be no deductibles. Healthcare as a human right, which was the party's slogan, came to be realized at least as far as it can be in this capitalist system where insurance rules. Retirees ended up with the best health insurance on campus, even better than the college president. In wages, Harvard had offered a paltry increase, amounting to less than $35,000 a year for workers who work from 5 in the morning till late at night. What was actually won in the strike was pay for time when they are laid off in the summer. See, Harvard, in the capitalist tax scheme of things, is actually a non-profit corporation, even with its $40 billion of endowment. They don't even have to pay unemployment tax. What the workers won was pay for not working. It's really quite a revolutionary demand that they won that we talk about all the time. We demand either work or an income, and the strike actually achieved it. For the first year, they'll be paid even if they work less hours than they normally work. Even if they're working, they will get a bonus of $2,500, going up to $3,000 in the remaining years, which brings them up to their goal of everybody making more than $35,000 a year. On top of that, they got a flat 60 cents per year raise over 5 years, raising their wages by $3 an hour. Wow. They even got a $500 bonus for being on strike. Most of the cheers at the ratification meeting, which I had the honor of attending yesterday, from the ranks who packed the church in Harvard Square, were for demands that were won around respect, dignity, and workers' power. These, it was explained at the meeting, were what Harvard was most antagonistic toward, that they did not cough up until the very wee hours of Tuesday morning, when the students were still occupying the building and the workers were still pounding drums outside. The Harvard University cooks, dishwashers, and cafeteria workers won a diversity and equity committee, a union task force, to investigate all cases of discrimination within the and for equal treatment on the job. This includes much improved non-discrimination language for gender identity and for union activities, which they never had before. Union activities, hard to believe, but they could discriminate against them for even handing out leaflets at the cafeteria. No more. They won strict seniority for promotions and transfers. They won, this one got the most applause, cheering, and sustained uproar at the membership meeting. They won an increase in uniform and shoe allowances. They'd only been allowed to get one pair of shoes a year. If you ever worked in a kitchen, which I have, you know that you go through many more than one pair of shoes a year with all of the oil and the dirt and the hot water that tears them to shreds. They won allowances that they could spread over 2 pairs of shoes. It was a major deal. They won the right to eat meals in the cafeteria in the summer, even when they're laid off. Yes. That had been not allowed before. For the first time, shop stewards will be allowed the right to meet with workers while on the clock. That was strictly forbidden before. Now they'll be paid around rights in the union contract to meet with workers and deal with their grievances. The union, for the first time ever, has a right of 45 defined minutes to meet with new hires at orientation. They were barred explicitly before from orienting new workers to their rights. And there will be protections for all of the workers around positions and postings of jobs that happen during the strike, so that everyone will have a right and jobs will be reposted, and there is explicitly no retaliation during the strike. But if you think that's good, the frosting on the cake came at 1:30 in the morning when Ed sent word from down below, from the lines, that the workers needed one more thing, and Harvard was so desperate to settle in the face of the severe crisis that their plan had engendered for themselves, that they agreed that they would pay 100% of all of the deductions that would have come out of the workers' checks during the 22 days of strike. Get this, they're paying 100% of the premium for health insurance, dental insurance, vision insurance, long-term disability, life insurance, home and auto insurance that came out of workers' checks, parking fees. It costs $50 to park in Harvard. They're going to reimburse everybody for parking during the strike. They're going to reimburse everybody for the MBTA, the public transportation passes, and nobody will owe one single dime for any of that. This is a settlement that we have never heard of before, that it truly can be called historic and a political victory for the courageous and brave workers of Harvard University. For 22 days, the cooks and dishwashers taught the main course at the elite Harvard University, that the workers have the power to bring down even the worst of the boss's plans. In fact, what we witnessed and participated in during the HUD strike was a glorious training ground for the new executive committee of the future ruling class of this country. Long live Workers' World Party. Long live the rank and file of Local 26. Thank you.